Now, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. This is Ephesians chapter 2. Verse 21 says, in whom the whole building being fitted together grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. We focus on verse 21 and 22 again. In whom the whole building being fitted together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. So the building becomes a temple, which means then that not every building is a temple. Not every building that has a steeple, that has musicians, that has chairs, that has a preacher is a church. Let me say it again. The Bible says in verse 21, in whom the whole building, when it's fit together, Sister Nikita, grows into, you grow into a holy temple. That as you come together, as you find your place, as you find your fit, as you find your function, because in your function, your oil is released. When you find that place and you come together, you become a temple. A temple is not a tabernacle. A tabernacle is where people gather to teach and to learn, but a temple is where the presence of God dwells. He said, in whom you also are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. Somebody say, in the Spirit. And then we climax on Psalm 127, verse 1. This is where we are today because we're talking about building a house of glory. Psalm 27, 1 says, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. But we're going to talk about this first clause of this text. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Which tells us that a whole lot of people are building things, but God has nothing to do with it. And unless God builds it, He'll let you go ahead being busy, but He will not have anything to do with it. Because God only gives one clarity or one clear instruction in Isaiah 60. It said, I will glorify the house of my glory. That the only house I'm committed to filling with the glory of God is a house that I built. The only house that I have a commission and a commitment to build is the house that I've given the occupancy certificate for, because it aligns with my dictates, it aligns with my language, it aligns with my precepts, and it is a house whose foundation is Christ. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. God builds his house of glory with Christ as the central figure. We don't preach this much because now in our churches, the preacher is the central figure. In some churches, communion is the central figure. In some churches, Eucharistic expression is the central figure. Some churches, they run over everything and the offering is the central figure. But God says that the house that he's building is a house where Christ is the cornerstone. Jesus told the disciples, he said, upon the revelation that I am the Christ, I'll build my church. He said, upon the revelation that you have that I am the central figure of this which we are building, and understand Jesus was never talking about a building. He said, I'll build my church out of these, what he calls living stones. These stones of people who are gathered together, built on the foundation that was laid by the apostles and the prophets. So that even as we are building, if we're not building based on the doctrine that was laid out in the New Testament, we are building wrong. The apostles are those who got fresh revelation from Christ of what it is our identity is in God. The prophets were the ones who foretold where we are headed in Christ. Unless our church is built on these, our church will fall. Understand that when Christ is removed from this building, it is bound to collapse and disintegrate. It cannot stand. Look at somebody say, it cannot stand. When Christ is no longer at the central part of our building, we understand whatever we're building will come to nothing. Our preaching is in vain. Our clapping is in vain. Our dancing is in vain. Our coming every Sunday is in vain. Because unfortunately, Christ is no longer even identified in churches. You go in spaces, you think you're at a motivational rally rather than a church. Because his name is not mentioned even once. Or if they mention it as a tack on to their prayer. They mention it as a little word in their singing, but you understand and know where Christ is central because you are now understanding that we are being built in the character of God. The character of Christ. When Christ is not in the building, Prophet Jerry, it becomes a man-made edifice. And it's prone, as we understand now, to the damaging effects of humanism. We've seen, especially on the campaign trail in the U.S., they've used the church. They use the church to gain brownie points. So now the politicians are now parading through the churches, and churches giving them little time to talk on the pulpit, giving them little time to talk and to do a little mini rally in the churches. So instead of the politician receiving a prophetic word on what God is saying, we are now pandering to political jargon. And we see how they use the church after they're done with it. They use the church to push the agenda. And when they get in, they forget about the prominence of the church. And churches are now sold out to politicians. They have no moral backing. They have no moral standing. They have no moral weight because now they're in the pockets of politicians. Subjected to them for piece of land and subjected to them for a board appointment or subjected to them to give couple jobs in the government. But God says the church is called to be the light. And we're getting ready to go into our own election cycle, and they're going to come around to these churches trying to get their names in and trying to get their agenda across. But the church must stand. That the church is called to be the moral fiber or the moral guide of the nation. That the church is called to be the voice of God crying out in the wilderness. But we've sold ourselves for a bowl of porridge. We've sold our birthright and we've just become all things to all men, as opposed to being the moral fiber. Now, while we cannot legislate morality, we can be the salt. Like we can't legislate to tell people you have to live like this. No, we can't legislate to tell people that if you don't do this, you will die. No, they are given to that. We are called to be the place that is there to heal, to restore, and to be the pinnacle of morality. Look at your neighbor and say, I'm not going to sell out. I'm not going to sell out. It is damning on the church when we are now put in the same category as just people who just got something to say. So they use us. I watch them. It's called this word, they call it in governance, they call it tokenism. Anybody familiar with the word tokenism? Let me help you with what tokenism is. Tokenism is what they do with young people. when they try to push the agenda that we leave in the next generation. So what they do is they find one young person, put them on the board, and then say, we believe in young people. But their policies don't reflect what they believe in. Tokenism is when they use either your status, or they use your what makes you peculiar. They use that to push their agenda, but when they're done using you, they push you on the side. The church has become now a part of the tokenism of governments. But God is calling the church back to be the salt and the light. If we don't let Christ be the central part of the church will now collapse within itself, because we now submit ourselves to humanism and man-made philosophy that changes with every wind of doctrine. What is this house? It is a house that is built on the rock that cannot be moved. Let's keep playing. Be along. This is the only house that God will glorify. Bethel, Christ as the chief cornerstone not only holds the house together, but Kira, the fact of the matter is, his mere presence is the structural buildup of the church. That he's not just the foundation, but he keeps the stones together. That not only is he the foundation, he's the cement that keeps the bricks together. Not only is he the cement, but he's the capstone that grounds it all out. That without Christ, the Bible says, in him we consist. That if he's not here, we are no better than fraternities. If he's not here, we're no better than social organizations. And the church has lost its fiber because over the years, we've become pantries. Let me come down this road right here. The church recently has become clothing drive houses. We've become places where people could get a hot meal. We've become places where people could get a change of clothes. But the church is more than that. Yeah, the church is the voice of God in the nation, where we cry aloud and we give the nation moral direction. We give the nation compass. And unfortunately, we are sitting back waiting for them to give us instruction. So we stay outside of the curtain. We stay outside of the systems. We stay outside of the schemes. We stay outside of the conversation, except God has called us to add our voices to the conversation. We sit back and we wait until they say something, and then we go to placards, and then we make noise. Yeah, we sit down. We don't pay attention. Let me help us out. We don't pay attention to news. We don't pay attention to what's happening in the newspapers. We don't pay attention to what's happening in the parliament. But we sit back and say the nation is going to hell. But how can the nation be corrected if we sit on the sidelines and allow them to make decisions? Good old Baptist preachers used to preach like this. They said every Baptist preacher ought to have a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the next. Let me say it again. They would preach and they say every good preacher ought to have a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the next, because we cannot be oblivious to what's happening and then expect to speak to it afterward. We are too reactionary. We are too like to wait until things happen before we make a move. And God has called us to be catalysts, to be the one influencing. And that's why I came here this morning. We're not just here to commemorate those who may have passed from breast cancer. And we're not just here to cheer on those who are still surviving breast cancer. God has called us to stand in the gap and stop breast cancer from spreading where it needs to be. Okay, y'all, look at God has not called us just to be here to hope that people are well. No, we're here to stand in the gap to make sure it never comes to our house. We too like to wait until our house gets it before we are influenced or do something about it. God said we are here not to just stand behind, we're here to stand in front. Yeah, the church must understand that if we are going to be set in the nation as we are called to be, because we are prophetic, we don't wait for things to happen. We speak things already about to happen and intercede and interrupt and intervene and come in the gap. That's why you are prophetic. Because you are prophetic, it means that you don't look at old news to determine what's going to happen. No, when you are prophetic, you walk into the future and you speak back to today. Okay, let me say it again. When you are prophetic, God allows you to walk into the future and interrupt the present by speaking from the future. So when you are the church of the living God, Jesus allows you to walk into tomorrow and speak from the place of today and shift how your tomorrow was going to look. You don't have to wait till cancer hits your body to now come and ask the church to pray for you. No, God has given you authority that you can speak to your body and tell your body, cancer will not even grow here because I'm the healed already of the Lord. Somebody say, I am the church. Somebody say again, I am the church. The problem is that we have been moving the foundation. And Psalm 11:3 says, if the foundation be removed, what shall the righteous do? If the foundation is cracked, what do we have to stand on? If the foundation is not working, what do we have to build on? God has told me to let you know that the church is the glory carrier in the earth. The church is the temple. The church is the conduit by which God gets glory in the earth. But if the church is shut up, how can the glory of God fill the earth? If the church is muzzled, how can the glory be released in the nations? Until we come into the fullness of Christ. Let's stand over this house. Until we come to the fullness of Christ, we cannot revive or receive an occupancy certificate. Bethel, God is not merely interested in visitations. He wants the place to abide. Jesus told the disciples, the foxes have their nests, the birds have their holes, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Let me help you out with what that means. The foxes represented a group of people, whether they were the Greeks or whomever. The birds represented another group of people. The Greek had their God, and they had a place for him. The birds, which represented another group of people, had the place for them. But he said the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. It didn't mean that he was homeless. It meant that he had not yet had the church for him to sit on the throne. So all these other groups of people had places where their king sat on the throne. But until that time, the king had nowhere to lay his head because he had not yet built his house, which is the church. Can I tell you that we are the throne of God in the earth? That if we are out of place, he cannot stretch forth his scepter and change anything in the earth because he has no place of, here's the word, jurisdiction. When he said the foxes have their holes and the birds have their nests, he was talking about places where their dominion or their kingdom can reign. The Son of Man didn't have a throne by which he can execute in the earth. Here's how powerful and potent you are. You often heard the text that when it says, wherever two or three are gathered, there am I in the midst. Yeah. Because according to Roman culture, the emperor lived in Rome, but they sent people all over the world. And yes, at the reason they said, if you are a Roman citizen and you are a Roman citizen and you are somewhere in America, whenever the two of you come together, it is if the emperor of Rome is in the midst of you. Which means then that when you see each other, you've got to make sure that he is straight. He's got to make sure you're straight. Because the emperor abides in your coming together. Jesus took that same concept and brought it to the church. And so wherever two of you are gathered together, touching, agreeing on anything, you have the full resources of heaven behind you. Let me help us out. Other people work it. We just don't. How do you know? Find a large brother. They don't care where they are in the earth. All they got to do is show a sign. And whatever it is that they cannot be, you could be a large brother from here and you go to New York, and if that night you don't have a place to stay, they are obligated to make sure you have a place to stay that night until you get back home. When you are from the Bahamas and you go away and you can't get away, you lost your passport, the embassy in that place is obligated to make sure that you are covered until you get home. Here's what happens. We are the embassy of Christ. No one ought to come to this house and lose their passport and are not covered until they get straight. So there ought to be nobody in here hungry and they aren't covered until they could put bread and butter together again. That no one should be able to come here and be with their light off and they aren't covered because you're part of this that God is working in the earth. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Bethel, let's not labor in vain. Let's keep Christ as the center of this house. Let's keep him center of this house. With your hands raised all over this place. Glory be to God. Put your hand down 1 second. God just showed me, reminded me about something. Here's why the fivefold ministry graces have to become alive in this house. Because even though God builds the house, he uses subcontractors called the fivefold ministry to build it. So God builds the house by being the chief architect and the chief contractor. But he subcontracts the work to the apostle, to the prophet, to the evangelist, to the pastor, to the teacher. Their goal, their role is to report to him on the stages that this house is being built upon. That he is the chief architect, the chief contractor, but there's a space for you in the earth to build upon this house. That there's a grace that is on you. If you're not in the fivefold, there are various ministry gifts, 9 of them, by which you hold a part. You got saved, and when you got saved, you got to give. Or 2, or 3. And based on the level of assignment on your life, an apostle can come and give you a further gift to push the work in the house in which you are planted. That because God plants you here, he's giving you a grace for here. So you sit down and say, I only come to receive. You're out of order. I come to do nothing in church today. Just sit down and hear the word of God and go home. You're out of order. I've been used all my life to build up other people's church. And I come just to relax and wait till my name called. you're out of order. That I'm not here to be your whatever. I'm here to be your coach, to throw you in the game. I ain't here to spoon feed you. And I'm not here to do it for you. Because there's something on you and in you that the church needs. That's why you were sent here. It's my job to identify you and put you in the game. Now, if you don't want to play, then the head coach could call you out. Hear me. But Bethel, God says, I'm about to stir up the gift in you. Because we're in this now, we're talking about glory. I'm about to stir up the gift of God in you. Because you've got to get in the game. You all this year, you've been sitting in the sideline, you've been on what happened? God, you've been laying, why you looking like that? All this year, all this year you've been up in the stands. This is the most you've been doing all year. Not you. This is the most you've been doing all year. Go team, go. That's my team. I'll be spelling this. That's my church. Oh, that's my pastor. But what's preach like a preach pastor? But what's happening for me should be happening for you. No, you will sit there, come in your pretty clothes, and stand in the stands. Go team, go. No, God is calling you from the stands, and He's calling you in the game. Because here's the thing. You got to hit the court. Look at your hands. Every building needs somebody to work in. If you're not a mason, I need you here to put in to put up the sheetrock. If you can't put up sheetrock, I need you to go bomb a nail. If you can't bomb a nail, clean up the nails around. I was at a job site this past week. You had fellas up there doing the masonry work, and then you had some fellas who in the back chipping the wall. Then you had some fellas who was just there to put the garbage on the back of the truck. But everybody at the end of the day get the paycheck. There was a prophet by the name of Lyndon Pendling who says, "What up, Diga?" There's a prophet named. He said, "Either you fish, you cut bait, or you understand." I just had a couple letters in between, a couple words in between there. Or get out the boat. Either you fish, you cut bait, or you get out the boat. When God is building a house of glory, everybody needs their hands on deck. Some people I know how we go. We can wait till the house build, then move in and lay up. Like, boy, this is a nice house we built. Eh? Yeah, but here's a difference. You can lay up in the house, man, you. But when payday come, you don't wait. You don't eat. But this ties into what we're talking about the 5 areas of ministry. Find yourself in one. Find yourself in one. If you can't put mortar on the wall, pick up a nail. You can't bomb a nail, pick up the nail of the floor. Can't pick up the nail of the floor, put something in the trash can. Look at your neighbor, look them in the eye. Don't make sure they look at you. Don't let them blink. Say, do something. Find somebody else, look them in the eye. Like my former pastor, Dr. Francis used to say, eyeball to eyeball, and say, do something. If the left eye a little weak, go follow it and say, do something. But there are exciting times ahead for us. Look at your neighbor and say, we're about to build. Y'all looking, say, we're about to build. And I'm not just talking about spiritually, we're about to build Bethel, the city of Bethel. We got a place to go because there are people to occupy the space. It's going to take your resources, it's going to take your time, but everybody needs to get involved. No more sitting on the sideline with your hand full and your hand swinging and waiting for something to happen.